Hello and welcome to the third virtual CIO Conclave and Awards being organized by Elets Technomedia. I welcome all the esteemed panelists to a discussion on moving pharma and healthcare beyond the pandemic. Joining us today, we have Mr. Ganesh Ramachandran, Global Chief Information Officer at Alchem Laboratories Limited. Welcome, sir.
Thanks for having me here, Garima.
We also welcome Mr. Himanshu Rastogi, Chief Technology Officer, MediAssist. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Garima.
And Mr. Manu Gupta, Vice President IT, Kedala Pharmaceuticals Limited. Welcome, sir. So we will move straight away into the discussion. Pleasure, sir. We have a lot of ground to cover. So I'll begin with Ganesh, sir. So the COVID-19 pandemic has pressed the pharma and the entire healthcare sector to rethink the traditional methods of doing businesses. So could you please give your insights on, into the new operating model for the industry?
Thanks, Garima. Yeah, indeed. I think COVID has really accelerated digital, which we've all been seeing over the last couple of years. Particularly if one were to look at pharma, I think pharma had jumped onto the digital bandwagon a little later than some of the other industries for myriad reasons. And I think this gave us a great opportunity to kind of relook at the way in which things were happening. The biggest place where, to my mind, we saw transformation coming across was in the front office, which traditionally was always face-to-face. I mean, if you look at the way pharma is, and probably still is today as well, patients prefer to go in person to the doctors. Medical reps or the field teams who engage with doctors, again, prefer to go face-to-face. A lot of the interactions that were happening even within the organization were face-to-face, and that just cut right across the value chain. What I think COVID proved to us, and it really wasn't a choice because you couldn't go face-to-face, was it kind of gave you the opportunity to rethink of the way in which you were engaging with different stakeholders. And I think that was perhaps the biggest change that really started with saying that you needed to have business continuity. And from there on, I think what has really transformed to is people realizing that there is a lot more efficient ways of doing things. You don't need to be doing things the old way. And it's re-questioned many of the paradigms that were there earlier, whether you needed to kind of get across physically for review meetings. You don't. You can very well do it from the comfort of your office. If you need to connect with key stakeholders like management teams wanting to connect with key doctors, for instance, you could very well do it from your office. You don't need to physically travel over there. And the doctors were much more comfortable as well, because given that many of the key doctors have schedules that fluctuate depending on the practice that they are part of, it made sure that you didn't need to keep a person waiting. You could as well tell them, hey, I'm running a little late on this call, so let's connect after 15 minutes or let's connect after half an hour. So I think things like that really transformed the way we were looking at the front office kind of connecting with stakeholders. What it also gave was an opportunity to extend beyond just your organization to other parts of the value chain, your suppliers, your R&D CROs that you were interacting with, other key parts of the organization which were outside of you, and making sure that you were able to afford a much better experience in terms of connecting with them. So to my mind, if you were to ask me what all transformed owing to pandemic, I would think pretty much the fact that digital has come to the forefront has been the biggest change that we have seen owing to the pandemic. And this change is here to stay. So while people talk of new normal, I think this is the normal, because this is the way you're now looking at things to be happening. And increasingly, the kind of requirement is coming back to the CIO and the teams saying that how can you make sure you enable business to perform better? I think that has been the key. It no longer is about technology. In the business teams, you see a lot more people who understand technology better, and the technology teams are being forced to understand business better. So the boundaries between business and technology have blurred, to my mind. That has been one of the biggest things that you've seen. And there is a lot more of a coexistence that is there in saying that we need to leverage technology for our benefit. How do we do that? What are things that we can take on? So to my mind, Garima, those are the biggest ones that we have seen changing owing to the pandemic.
Right, sir. Right. Very aptly, put. Manu, sir, if I can ask you to also, share some insights on this question.
Sure. Ganeji, I completely agree with you. The major thing that pandemic has changed is how we reach to our customers, how we reach to the doctors, how we used to reach to the stockists, the end users. However, just to add to your thought, it's the backend also, there are multiple other factors that whether how we are handling the clinical research, how we are reaching to our suppliers, and how we are controlling the manufacturing, the GMP compliance, the quality. Those also has been now seeing the light of the day in terms of digital transformation, in terms of digital changes. So if I say clinical trials, there are ways where we are reaching the potential candidates. We are tracking them remotely, we are getting the data recorded remotely. So these are the areas where which was previously never thought about. Again, when I say quality and manufacturing and GMP processes, there is a huge push now to stabilize these areas also, in terms of how we track them, how we record them, how we control them digitally, to ensure that all the processes that are happening in the plant are controlled in a way that if there are deviation, it is not recorded at the end of the processes, it are getting recorded at right when they are happening, and controlled at the time when they are happening. Similarly, supply chain, there is a huge change into way the supply chain is completely getting mobilized. How we are interacting with the vendors, how we are understanding them, how we are collaborating them, and it is no more just the price game now. It is about the services, it is about the trust, it is about the alignment.
Right, sir. Right. I think that it's like a 360-degree transformation that has happened across the sector. Mr. Himanshu, if you could also, share your insights on this.
Well, I'll start off with like it wouldn't have been a better time for some technologists because what you have built gets consumed. And that's like the biggest satisfaction as a technologist I'll get. So I'll split the question in two parts, like how I saw the transformation. One on the customer side. We service close to 18% of India's health insurance, and we have been on the forefront of technology. But in spite of whatever we have built, I saw like in first wave 4x jump on online consumption of information. So that was significant. And these were likes of people in various age groups. It's not that the younger generation was latching on to online. I saw like retired employees of large corporates who are 70 plus. They got hooked onto the online. As long as things were there, they were ready to discover and figure it out how to make it happen. What also I realized was it's not that you being digitally present would solve the problem, because all these consumers were looking for various channels in which they were consuming the information, and you have to take the information there. Example being WhatsApp. So like WhatsApp, if you send, somebody says like, how do I make a health insurance claim? So I can't just tell him like, these are the 7 steps, and then this is how you do it. What we started doing is, hey, you be on WhatsApp. I will not take you to another channel, but I will serve you over there, because that's the preferred medium that consumer has chosen. So no point moving him from one medium to another medium. In terms of customer metrics, I think for quite some time we used to measure like how many downloads an app has. No more significant. It's the active users, daily active users or monthly active users. They become a very important metric, because it's a short-lived app and you can't be fighting for app, because each one of us will have 5 screens and each screen has 25 apps. So there is no point. So you have to think of innovative ways. When consumer wants, you have to be there. It doesn't matter what channel. Digital happens to be one of the important ones, but he will reach out to voice channels, customer will reach out on non-voice channels, and digital has to be equally good. So like you can't say like your offices are shut, you can't assume that your online channel can be shut. On people front, as Ganesh and Manu said, see, it was very different, because we are healthcare as a sector was predominantly heavy floor driven. And how do you measure it? These were driven by floor managers, and they can see that this guy is there and he is producing something. The way to measure the productivity changed, and it wouldn't have been possible because all our employees, our employee base is at home. So giving the right infrastructure so that they are as productive, not that they don't want to be, but infrastructure has to be such that all that they were sitting in office can be consumed sitting at home. At the same time, measuring their productivity changed. So these were few things which we did. However, these are the good things, but there were certain sad parts, and I would like to touch on. So I do miss those cooler conversations, which I can catch up with my team, and that happens to be 15 minutes minimum calendar slot. So that I definitely miss. And that physical connect, though I can see all of you on the screen, but there was fun of catching up physically, having a cup of tea. That goes missing. But on a larger landscape, I see like these are smaller things to trade off. The bigger thing is like it is definitely people are consuming information.
Right, right. Thank you, sir, for this wonderful context setting. Mr. Ganesh, I would like to probably, ask you to delve further into in detail on how the pandemic has influenced priorities and strategies for organizations, especially in the pharma sector.
Thanks very much. So yeah, I think I'll just segue from where both Himanshu and Manu were kind of pointing out. Himanshu made a point saying it's no longer about looking at tech kind of KPIs, right? It's more about the business KPIs that you're looking to drive. So the example he gave of downloads versus actually saying what's happened to the business. So to me, I think the four key drivers that one looks at, and I think this would be true across industries, but particularly for pharma, I think what one looks at is what is the impact that you're making to the top line? What is the impact that you're making to the bottom line? How are you driving experience? I think one of the big things that has jumped significantly over the last couple of years has been the experience you provide to your stakeholders, whether they be internal stakeholders or they be external stakeholders. So it's not about just customer engagement, it's equally about employee engagement as well. And the last one, which I think has gained significantly, and Manu also spoke about saying how many of the things have moved virtual. Even some of the audits have moved to being virtual. So compliance as well. How do you kind of take care, which is a big thing in the pharma sector. So if I were to take each of these four areas and let me talk about how things have changed dramatically over there. So I think what we saw, particularly during the pandemic, was given that you were seeing multiple parts of the value chain facing challenges. So if you were to look at many of our stockists, for instance, they were significantly challenged during the initial part of the pandemic because your field teams were not able to go out onto the field. Distribution was kind of struggling in some places with the lockdown. Working along with them, making sure you had regulatory approvals because you needed to have medicines at the final last mile point where a patient could access it. That was something that was quite important. And what we started moving to, and you'll see it in our earnings calls as well that we call out, we started tracking secondary sales. So what that gave us a visibility into was, and I'll try and link it back to the four drivers that we were talking of. From a top line perspective, we started seeing which were the places where people were nearing a stock out and what was the kind of demand patterns that we were seeing. And hence worked along with them to say, which do you need more of to be there available with you? And how do I kind of play it back into my supply chain, which can become more resilient, and the distribution chain to make sure that you had drugs being available. So that obviously meant that lesser stockouts, more availability of the right drugs to patients at the right pockets which were required, because you were seeing variability coming right across regions depending on as lockdown was opening up. There was variability across different therapy sectors that one was seeing. Second area which we started looking at was from a viewpoint of looking at, and I'll stick with the same example of secondary sales, we also started tracking where were places where you were having excess stock lying around which could start going towards expiry. And hence, how do I move it around to places where you're not going to be losing out on that? So that's an area, again, where we started looking at saying, how can I leverage this data to kind of start playing with it? From an experience perspective, we were to look at it. One of the first things that we did, and I'll cut back to March 2020, when the pandemic was just about starting, and everyone was wondering, how do we really engage? What do we do? What is required? We did the try and tested one of going back to our customer and asking them, what would you guys like? And what are things that you're looking for? So we spoke to about 2,000 plus doctors around that time. And the common thread that we heard from them was two things. One, they said, we are very worried about how our patients' health would be taken care, because there is a problem of me going to the clinic and there's a problem of their accessing the clinic as well. And second, they were also worried about their practice, of course, because that's what they do for a living. So, what we did in conjunction with them was we helped them set up a virtual clinic for patient engagement. So, this is not the platform where a patient can go and search for a doctor. This is where a doctor can set up a virtual clinic and extend that link to their patients. So that's what we started out with. It's a secure, easy to use platform that was provided to doctors. We launched the beta version in June 2020. Again, from a pharma perspective, given that most of us are not on the complete agile path, this was something very different for us because you had to turn around something within a couple of months, and requirements were constantly shifting depending on what you were seeing coming out from the field. So while it started out as one where you set up a virtual clinic, allowed a doctor to calendarize, set up slot and payments depending on whether it's a first-time consult, follow-on consult, depending on the therapy area that you have. Psychiatry, you had a longer 1 hour kind of a slot that was available. If you were a GP, maybe a 10, 15-minute slot that was available. Things like that is what we started with and afforded a teleconsult platform to be provided. But what we did was we crafted that platform along with doctors and for doctors. And what we kind of moved on that was to provide the ability for doctors to be able to kind of get closer to their patients, provide them nudges of information, remind them when they have to come to a follow-up, make sure that patient's health was taken care. So again, all of this from a viewpoint of a doctor, how do they engage their customers better? And from our viewpoint, how do we stay relevant to what the needs of the customer were? And lastly, from a compliance perspective, as I was saying, I think many of the things, and Manu alluded to some of those, right? Whether it was on the quality front, whether it's at the plant level things that we are doing, working with the FDA on virtual audits, because in the current scenario, what you're seeing, and some of our plants are in remote locations, what the FDA wanted was to be able to view your whole plant virtually. So kind of like, if you would imagine either going around with a camera and showing people the entire plant, or a Google Glass kind of an equipment which you put on and kind of show people the whole plant. That was what they wanted to see. And you also needed to be able to transfer a lot of the information securely, because now they were asking for your data to be shared with them, which they could study and come back to you. So to my mind, if I were to sum all this up, Garima, I think the priorities have clearly shifted towards saying, how do you be relevant for what the business requirement is with the customer need really at the core of whatever you were doing? Was it not relevant before? Of course it was. But somewhere what you were seeing was a challenge to make sure that people were able to realize what was the benefit you could get from digital, which I think that paradigm has completely changed now as people have realized that, hey, there is a lot of stuff here which we've not really tapped into, whether it be the management teams, board teams, and many of the areas, and we haven't even scratched the surface in some of the ones like cybersec and others, which has also gained a lot of prominence, given that both the sector was seeing a lot of threats that were coming in, and also the need as people were seeing that this is something that is real, and we need to kind of work along and strengthen a lot of our things as we are embarking on or strengthening our digitalization journeys. So I think that's what we've really been seeing as we've gone about it. Different companies are in different stages of evolution on this, but I think the change is well and truly here.
Right, right. Very well put, sir. Thank you. Thank you for those wonderful insights. Uh, okay. So, sir, you actually gave us an insight. How the pandemic, people were forced to think out of the box and come out with strategies and transformations that were required to combat that scenario. I would like to ask Mr. Maru and of course come back to Mr. Ganesh on how do you see the industry probably preparing themselves to look at future challenges, and what are the areas that might be needed to be looked into to prepare industry to handle the situation better?
Garima, I would say that we jumped to whatever we know during the COVID. We jumped to a lot of digital transformations. We jumped to a lot of different digital solutions, uh, and most of them were experimentals. I personally, for me, I would say that they were experimentals. We were trying our hands on first time. We have not thought about this paradigm shift. However, there are lots of nitty gritties that we kind of put it back, which now needs to come in front. One of them were majorly the security of all the data. That has become the forefront now as the as we are more stabilized into our digital journeys. So how we are securing the data, how we are ensuring our systems are secure. And when we say that another level of security, when we go to IT OT integration, where how our machines and processes needs to be secure. So those are is one of the areas where we as a industry need to focus a lot on. The second I would say is we have we have jumped into all type of data, but now we have to really understand and analyze on what kind of a data that we need, what kind of data that we require, what we do out of it, how we make it more meaningful, which is the additional data that we do not require, because tomorrow or 2 years down the line or 5 years down the line, this data will be huge, and we need to start thinking on it, start acting on it, as what is the classification of this data, how, where we need to use it. Do we need to, as a GMP compliance, do we need to store it at our premises, do we store it at the cloud level, which data needs to be segregated to be stored at our premises versus the cloud, and how is the different strategy of segregation as well as analysis needs to be happening on this data.
Right. Thanks, Mr. Manu. Mr. Himanshu, you wanted to, have a take on this question. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll pick up certain things which Ganesh said and Manu also alluded to. So, see, my assumption is consumption, like many other industries, will in this sector also would happen very close to customer itself. He's not going to go to a pharmacy store and buy medicine. He's not walking into clinics to get a consultation. So it's going to happen a lot closer to him. So, like Ganesh said, like they did certain things on teleconsultations. With whatever happened in last 2.5 years, we have seen a surge in teleconsultation and interestingly on mental counseling, because people are feeling a new stress, and it's not just our employees, it's not just our management, it is everywhere, because this is not because you have been confined to a particular space and which was not as a country we were used to. So my biggest thing is like consumption in this sector would start happening closer to consumer, which happened in every other industry. Like commerce, it happened. Transportation, it happened. Wherein you book a Ola cab and then wait for it. You never said like, oh, Ola, like let me find it and then go. Second thing, what I think that puts an additional burden on this entire digital and IT landscape, because it's the same user who's expecting real-time information. So you can't be saying like, hey, I'm giving you information, but it is stale. So he expects like order like 2 minutes away or 3 minutes away. He's the same impatient customer who's basically looking at, he doesn't say like this industry didn't see it. It's not his problem. Now I'm ready to consume. I want the information real time and always there. You can't afford to go down. So you can't say like Amazon or Flipkart, they are always there when you want to, barring few instances. So you have the expectations of customer is the same. Third thing, which I think Manu and both Ganesh said, that will add another additional responsibility on this team, which is on securing this information, because exposing this information is easy. It's good. We should do it, but it puts a threat on how you are exposing it. If you are not ready, you may be vulnerable. So wherein basically certain things can be exposed. And lastly, I would say like a lot of this data that we are collecting, machine will play a significant role, wherein decisioning will happen a lot more based on data and not gut feeling. So it has been there, but now I have seen like in my particular organization itself, a lot more decisions happen on data, and everyone, right from CEO till like my AVPs, they carry data. They are become savvy and they want to consume data and say like, okay, this makes sense. Let's take a decision which is more data driven rather than just gut feeling and stereotypes. So that is few things which I see like has definitely changed.
Right. So I so agree with the point of expectations of consumers, of course, have risen drastically, and it's a lot of pressure on companies to fulfill those expectations. Mr. Ganesh, your thoughts on this, please?
So very much, I think both Himanshu and Manu have very eloquently spoken about the points over here. I completely agree with the areas that they laid out: analytics, security. So I'll just add a few points on those and a few more, which I don't think in the terms of areas, but in terms of what it means for us in terms of an IT team and what it means for the internal organization. I'd like to delve upon that. So first, from a security perspective, I think that the challenge, and it's important to kind of realize that as we opened up on digitalization and we went across and extended not just to within our value chain but outside of our value chain. So for instance, even simple things earlier in the industry were not norm. So for instance, things like giving a stockist an ability to punch an order directly onto our system was not something that was there, which is fairly standard in other industries like CPG, for instance. So I think that was something that we saw kind of gaining prominence. Similarly, if you're looking, and Manu was talking about this extending to suppliers, right? So giving suppliers a visibility as to what you're looking at, moving more towards a vendor managed inventory in many of the cases. These were again things that you've started seeing coming up in a big way. Now, what happens with all of this as you're extending your boundaries and you're extending your access to people who are a lot more beyond just your direct sphere of control? You are extending from a cyber perspective the potential attack surface. And on top of that, pharma has been one which has been in the limelight. There's been multiple attacks that I think it's been well documented in the press on attacks that were there for vaccine manufacturers at the R&D levels. So it became imperative for organizations to figure out how do you do this hand in hand, that if I'm going to be adding more digitalization, if I'm looking at more technology coming in, I need to have a strong cyber backbone. And it's led to multiple new initiatives that have come in. So things like privilege of least access, I mean, the least access that you would take as a principle, where you're looking at saying that if I'm extending it to other parts of the organization, this is the bare minimum access I need to provide and no more. So you don't randomly allow people to look at all sorts of things. Second, things like I think SOC was any which way already always there, the Security Operating Center. You did have things like zero trust networks that have started gaining in. But what I think people are looking at with some of the things that have happened within our industry is people are looking to say that I don't know if I'm going to be breached. And it's not just about prevention any longer. It is about saying that I assume that there is going to be a hit at some point in time because attacks are getting more and more smart. So I need to have a very efficient detection and response mechanism as well. And I think that's where people are moving towards. And this is no longer a management conversation. This is a board level conversation today, right? So board in most of the pharma companies, now board kind of has an oversight on this because they realize it is significant, not just from a financial perspective, but reputational perspective, the kind of ways in which business continuity can go on and so on and so forth. So that's one side on the cybersec front, which I wanted to just touch upon. Second, upon the analytics side that we're talking of, thanks to all the digitalization, we have created a whole bunch of data that's there. I don't think data, it is now an overload of data that one has. And, the attention span of people is very limited. So you can't be providing data and just throwing around huge bunches of data around to people and asking them to interpret it. So it is more about saying, how do I move the data to insights? What kind of actionable insights can one provide, which people can start kind of working on? So I won't even go to, while we are setting up the foundation, I believe, for things like AI, ML, I still think in many of our cases, it's more POCs that we are onto because even the descriptive analytics, we've not fully kind of utilized capabilities around. So that's where I would go on the analytics front. But the last part, which I think is critical and which I think is what many of us have started kind of getting onto or have accelerated a lot more, has been on the realization that in many of our cases, our backbone, the infrastructure, the kind of things on which these applications run, is running on legacy kind of stuff. So here you've got an external chassis, which is like a Ferrari, but you've got an engine, which is still fairly, a dated one and cannot really take the kind of agility that you want, the flexibility you're looking for, the ability to maneuver those sharp corners. I think that is what we are seeing a lot more kind of investments going on to, and the realization saying, I need to upgrade those systems. Second, and more importantly, technology is growing at a rapid clip. You have different kinds of things that are coming around. If we talk of, again, we spoke of analytics. How do you use things like data lake, data marts? People are talking of data fabrics today. So moving from your BW or your data warehouse that you had to these kind of concepts, what is the kind of architectural changes that you need to do? And aligned with it, what are skills you need to have? Do you look at data scientists? We are not necessarily seen as the coolest industry for data scientists to be part of. So how do you engage those people to come and stay with you and contribute towards the kind of thing that you're looking at? And how do you get your organization future ready to be able to take these on with not just the infrastructure and the architecture you need to have, but also the right kind of skill sets that you need to be going along with, and making sure that you put your investments in the right places, because all of these can be expensive if you don't get your act right. If the blueprint is not right, it can be a really expensive white elephant. So going back to our initial part of the value thing that we were talking of, I think making sure that you have all these as well covered. So the things that you're making, and I'm sure my co-panelists would agree, BCG had come out with a study on how the percentage of digital transformations that work and ones that don't. They showed that over 70% of digital transformations do not work, right? So we have a challenge ahead of us. How do you make sure that when you're getting this, and my personal belief is the CIO and their organizations are no longer seen as the technology leaders. We are now wearing the mantle of being change leaders for the organization, and making sure that you're providing technologies that are intuitive, that are easy to use for people, and people can kind of take it on and kind of go on, almost like what people keep talking of any of the other social media apps that we use. No one trains people on it, but they just take it on and run along with it. So how can you provide that kind of an experience? That's a huge challenge that we see, especially in many of our organizations where you were doing development in-house and the user experience was perhaps the last thing on your mind. You were looking at more functionality, meet ho raha hai ki nahi ho raha. So I think those are kind of things that we are kind of grappling with as we are kind of getting along, and resetting our own mindsets in terms of saying what are things that are needed to succeed in this revised or new accord kind of thing that we are kind of looking for. That's where I see the big change happening from, the overall expectation shift to our own ways in which we work.
Right, right. So I think moving data into insights, very, very pertinent point you raised. Uh, just a question that struck my mind hearing all this discussion. So I would open it to all of you. And do you think pharma is entering the metaverse? And do you see metaverse playing a role in business practices coming ahead? I'd like to begin with you, Mr. Manu, on this.
No, I would say it differently. I think currently you would not find any industry which is not. It is not only pharma. Every industry in this pandemic has done exceptional changes in it. Whether the industry has suffered due to COVID or has been promoted due to COVID, irrespective of that, there are changes throughout the processes in each and every industry. Pharma was altogether really a reluctant, a sober player in this whole digital journeys. They were highly focused on their audits requirement and compliance requirements, and that was the world for them. Definitely, this COVID has being a huge supporting of this COVID situation. The pharma was one of the areas where the whole COVID resolution was depend on. So in both sides, it has moved out of that mind setup that it is not only compliances, it's not only audits that we have to work on. It is how we can reach the customers, and customers have also become, I think, a completely different range now. Previously, the customer, you get a medicine, you take it and you believe in it. Now the first thing you as a customer, you want to get the review. You want, there is a term called efficacy. I don't know, before COVID anybody has heard that term called efficacy. So customers have actually reviewing it. Google has become the a platform where most of the pharma transactions are happening currently. So the complete paradigm shift has happened over this, I would say.
Right, sir. Mr. Himanshu, your thoughts?
Well, it's definitely interesting, and probably like what Ganesh said, like we were never the coolest industries to attract the best of the talents itself. So, and I faced this challenge when I joined in from a multinational. I came to here, and I never worked in an Indian setup. And pharma, very honestly, like I can say that it is tech deprived industry, healthcare and tech. It's tech deprived. So I had those challenges in initial 2 years, but luckily for us, we incubated two startups, and they both are on their own right now. And it's so touchwood now, like we are looked at a brand wherein some of the coolest people want to work. So ML AI is something that we have been solving some of the real problems. So finding out where the things are there or not there, we instead of using machines, humans, we are using machines. Unfortunately, the sector is very sensitive to some of the errors. So I can't say that I am 99% right or 99.99% right when you're doing trials. Not that my company does it, but borrowing it from my panelists, like it can't be. So your error rates, unless and until it is zero, it's a great experiment, but would take time to settle in. While that said, probably I'm not able to imagine there are a lot more things to happen. If it has happened somewhere else, I'm sure it will happen, and there would be newer things which would come. So we may not have the right use case. At least good thing is that technology is there, and now it is possible. We can make it possible. I'll give you another example. Like machine learning models always existed. It's just that the compute was not there. Now compute is so cheap that those models are realities. So there are certain variables which happen outside us which will drive certain things. Consumer taking, I want medicine to be delivered at home, has put us on the foot that boss, you have to do it or else you are. And borrowing again another one leaf from Ganesh's this thing, like in this sector, predominantly I have seen like IT was seen as a cost driver. But now this is the first time IT is not seen as a cost, but it is able to is seen as a revenue driver, wherein it is participating with the sales officer. CDO is participating, building forefront technology interfaces, which is not just helping you stay relevant, but be on the forefront, and it's a huge differentiator. So I would say it's not the end; it's a great start. Lot more to come.
Right, right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Ganesh, your views on the metaverse and the pharma,
So
journey.
I'd like to break that down, right? So if you look at metaverse, while there is a larger part that's there, if I look at the smaller kind of applications on AR, VR, those are already being used today. Whether you look at training for plant guys, you look at it for maintenance. I think there are multiple use cases which across pharma industry one kind of plays with. But I completely agree with Himanshu's point too, that we are not early adopters of technology traditionally in the pharma industry. We would rather like to see it kind of coming along. And this, if you were to look at metaverse, my own personal feel and with the little understanding that I have, I think this is fairly new, even in the Western world where they have adopted technology a lot more in the pharma industry too. So, and I completely concur with both Manu and Himanshu's points that we've got a lot more other basic things to be looked at. So while one can look at the ones around on that side, I think given your limited bandwidth that you would have to drive multiple initiatives, you'd probably focus on the immediate priorities. And I don't see metaverse being an immediate priority at the current stage. Perhaps a POC, perhaps something that one could look to kind of see what are things that are there. And especially on things on connected learning, connected experience parts, those for sure one could look at it. And I think in terms of automation, one does see, both humans and robots coexist. I think we do have cobots that are kind of there in parts of the value chain, especially if you look at manufacturing, if you look at parts around the R&D areas, there are places where it does make sense to have some of those. So metaverse, yeah, bits and pieces perhaps. But in the entire way in which one would probably view it, which one would see perhaps more in the other sectors like financial services and so on, still some time to go, I feel.
Right, right. Thank you, sir. So, Mr. Himanshu, you touched upon a point upon focus on mental health that is there and increasing, and even the government has initiated certain measures and announced them during this budget. And of course, the pharma sector was given the tag for sunrise sector. I would like to ask all the panelists how do they take these initiatives by the government, and do you think the support that is being given, are these enough, or what else probably can be done? Mr. Himanshu, if you can begin from you.
See, again, from health also, again, just talking about the particular part of the industry, which is insurance, the government has taken steps. Health as a matter was always a state matter, while now it has moved to center, and there is enough happening under PMJY regime. And interestingly, I was talking to some of the large insurers, and it's a very, very interesting thing. There are certain, they've divided entire population in three sectors. There is some who are like below certain level of income. Government looks at them. There are certain who can afford healthcare. They buy on their own. And there is a missing middle, as they call it. Nobody takes care of them. So government is taking certain initiatives. It's early, but what I would say is, because it's so huge, it's not a small setup that one of the players will do. So now the challenges everyone is seeing, but they compete in the same space as well. So unless and until it is an external driver, which is going to force all these people to come together and solve some of the complexities, it will be difficult. It could be consortiums which are formed on their own, or government of India feeding them. That might just kickstart the things. Once it is started, that initial inertia is over, then the ball will keep on rolling. So I think we would need a lot of support for that.
Right. Mr. Manu, your thoughts on this, please. So if you could unmute here.
Yeah. So, so I would say pharma needs to see the change in the way they have been thought or perceived by the government. The way the trials have been happening, the way the clinical trials have been happening, the way the compliances and the drug discovery, the norms around these needs to be rethought now. And pandemic has shown us, and many aside governments have actually allowed a drug release without the proper all the phases of the trial, but it has to be looked into the way that how can a industry serve the customers in the best way. I'm not saying that it should be looked into the way that we are compromising with the qualities, we are compromising with the results. But however, uh, to reach to a level of a quick drug discovery, of a quick delivery, a quick manufacturing, reaching to the users in a wide variety and in a record time. So these compliances needs to be rethought of.
Right. Thanks, sir. Mr. Ganesh, uh, your insights.
So I do think the government has been looking at multiple areas, right? So, and it's not just a pharma specific thing. As part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat program, the government has announced things for whether it was the production of COVID vaccines that we had seen, or whether it is for providing more support for getting more of the bulk drugs, where we are very dependent on imports for getting some of those going. I think the government has been trying to get some of those things kind of coming through. And even during the pandemic, when you were struggling with making sure that you had kind of reaching the drugs to the last mile, the government had helped significantly. There was a lot of cooperation you saw amongst the industry too to make that happen. I think it's the first time that I had seen some of those where you were sharing distribution to kind of make sure that drugs were available to patients where they needed to be. And of course, you have a lot of e-pharmacies as well coming up, which are also helping extend the part. So all of those, with the government support and policy support that's coming there, definitely does help. And I definitely believe that given what you're seeing in the last few quarters, where pharma as a sector has been seeing a lot of rising input prices, which is impacting margins all over. And perhaps, I don't know, with the current macroeconomic things that are going around, whether it will come down or soften in the recent or in the near term. I think the government policies around helping some of these and making sure that the industry is able to provide affordable medicines to people who need it will continue to remain a focus, because I think increasingly, and the pandemic is again helping that, health has become a huge area of focus, which government policies as well are helping drive. And the value chain put together, whether it is manufacturers, whether it is distribution partners, and insurance partners like the one Himanshu represents, I think these together and the governmental policies which looks at it in toto will definitely benefit citizens and the way in which we're looking at the sector to grow.
Right, right. Very important point you mentioned about, sir, the the cooperation, the collaborations industry witnessed during the pandemic. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Manu, about how purposeful collaborations will continue in the coming years and help to combat the pandemic or probably similar situations.
I think these will definitely going to stay along, and there are multiple areas where I can think of. There is a lot of scope of these collaborations that are going on. If I say, in a customer, right from the customer, we are seeing a lot of startups that are connecting directly the customer health to the either the clinical trials or the healthcare providers. We have wearable devices that can track the health conditions 24/7, and these data are directly being fetched and analyzed rightly directly at the healthcare units. So this type of collaborations, we have electronic dossiers of the people where the complete medical histories can be shared within and can be maintained. This will these are the customer, we have already seen quite a lot of new initiatives coming into these directions where they can make a huge difference in how we treat the customer, how the patients are categorized, how the patients are taken care of, and how the patients are analyzed. uh, if we move down the process chain, the way we are interacting with our qualities, the way we are interacting with our manufacturing, that is getting changed. We are being a more manual driven industries. We are getting into the more automated ways of handling production, more automated ways of handling qualities, and now the labs, external labs or internal labs, they will be directly connecting. We will be sharing the quality results. We will be uh, involving into collaborative ways of doing testing, sh- and checking the results completely in a digital way. Samely, if we move down the line towards the supply chain, again, the way we are interacting with the collaborations with the vendors, with the we are looking into the areas where we have contract manufacturing coming into the space. We have areas where we are specialized manufacturing. We have APIs that are being completely manufactured and catered by one unit versus the end drugs are getting, and the results, the quality and everything is shared very predominantly, and is being complete the supply chain. Similarly with our vendors, as Ganesh has stated, that it is not about just just giving us the goods or the price. It is not about that. It's how we are interacting with them. They are going forwardly managing the inventories within our organization. They are tracking our uses and ensuring that the right kind of raw material is available at the right time within the premise.
Right, right. Thanks. Mr. Himanshu, your thought on the purposeful collaborations within the sector?
Oh, it's bound to here stay. Like everyone gains out of collaboration. So, see, I'll just touch upon two parts of what every sector does. They either build certain things, and then there's certain things which they buy. In this particular sector, buy was very heavy and with like larger players. So, like somebody is looking at a finance system rollout or a ERP rollout. What I believe in, this buying would happen with lot more startups. They're solving some smaller niche problems, and sector needs to have ability to assemble them, build a solution which is useful to them. So there are certain people who are building electronic exchange, or somebody is building a digital pen, or a omni-channel strategy, like where how do you transition customer from voice to non-voice to chat to bot. So handling them would become important, and we will see a lot more vendors who are younger, who are smaller, and more nimble, rather than like world like Oracle and SAP. So they have been our favorites, but I think these nimble startups would eat some part of that breakfast.
Right. Wonderful, wonderful, sir. So, we are almost, towards the end of our discussion. So, before we kind of wrap up, I would like to, know from our panelists here their key takeaways and, how do they crystal gaze into the future for the pharma sector. So, Mr. Ganesh, beginning from you.
So I think it's exciting times for the pharma sector. And I think one of the things that we clearly did come across was everyone is, whether it was Manu's points that he was making, Himanshu's points that he was making, digitization and getting more and more of the digital parts coming in is here to stay. I think that's the thread that I picked up right across. And getting ready for it and seeing how you can work not just with your own teams, but also extending and going beyond your teams and collaborating, as we just about heard in the last conversation, becomes equally critical. Making sure that you have the right building blocks in place to be able to leverage the changes that one is seeing and to be able to achieve the outcomes one is looking for is something that really needs to kind of come to light. And I think organizations are scrambling to put those pieces in place, be it infra, be it people, be it processes, be it the kind of changes you need to evolve from your internal policies. I think all of those are things that we are seeing kind of coming together and which will probably gain more currency going forward.
Right, right. Thank you. Mr. Manu, your thoughts, please. Your final takeaways.
I think I see a lot of positive future in terms of how IT becomes a part of the business rather than the support function. It is the part of the business. It is the driver of the change. It is the driver of the transformation. It will be governing the ways the whole new digital processes will be designed and will be governed. So I see a lot of bright future, at least in the technical side.
Right, right. Thank you, sir. Mr. Himanshu, your last word.
Okay, perfect. See, like what I'll say, I'm hopeful and wishful that pandemic will go, but after effects will remain. So this transformation is here to stay, and I'm hopeful that pandemic will go, but for sure, like this is going to stay. That is one key takeaway. But interestingly, what happens is great powers has to be equipped with great responsibility also, and a lot more responsibility would come, especially on the way information is getting exchanged. This sector, we handle a lot of PI and SPI, and we have to be very careful that though we are not as a country, we ignore some of them. Government of India has been pushing some of these privacy bills, but we need to start building underpinnings right now, or else turning a ship would be harder. Turning a boat is easier. So we should start investing in those things. These are the two key takeaways for me.
Right,
Thank you.
right. Perfect, perfect. Thank you so much to all the panelists about it was wonderful to hear that the new normal, and of course meeting the expectations of the consumers while collaborating with technology and reaching out to as many people possible. And of course, moving data into insights. That would be, my learnings, the brief learnings that I could, capture from this session. So thank you so much, to all the panelists for being here. And it was wonderful listening to your, very pointed insights onto this subject. So please accept this small token of gratitude from our end for being here at the Elets CIO Virtual Conclave. Thank you, Mr. Manu Gupta, for your presence and your time for being here, sir. Thank you so much. Mr. Himanshu Rastogi, thank you for your presence, sir. It was wonderful listening to your thoughts during this session. And of course, Mr. Ganesh Ramachandran, it's always a pleasure listening to your insights. Thank you for being here. It was wonderful having all of you here. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.